On April 12, 1963, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was among nearly 50 protesters and civil rights leaders who were arrested after a Good Friday demonstration in Birmingham, Alabama. He was thrown into solitary confinement, denied his phone call, denied a lawyer, denied the ability to speak with his wife or with anyone on the outside. He had already instructed his followers not to bail him out so that his confinement might draw further attention to the plight of the civil rights movement. 8 local Christian and Jewish religious leaders then published an open letter criticizing King for his demonstrations and calling him an outside agitator who had no business in Birmingham, Alabama. From prison, without any notes, no access to books or a library, no research materials of any kind, he drafted a reply, quoting everyone from St. Augustine to Socrates, from Thomas Jefferson to Chief Justice of the United States Earl Warren. He castigated both the nation's religious leaders and more moderate white Americans for sitting passively on the sidelines while King and others risked their lives for change. "My dear fellow clergymen," he wrote, "while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that cross my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of a day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statements in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I am in Birmingham because injustice is in Birmingham. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its borders. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about these demonstrations. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins and marches and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks to so dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of a nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth, to create a kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see, with one of our distinguished jurists, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed towards gaining political independence, but we still creep at a horse and buggy pace towards gaining a cup of coffee at the lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the middle of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears well up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law, as would the rabid segregationist. That would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. Academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. We should never forget that everything that Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and that everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers the absence of tension to the presence of justice, who constantly says, "I agree with you in the goals you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action," who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythological concept of time and who consistently advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill. I felt we would be supported by the white church. I felt that the white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be amongst our strongest allies. Instead, some have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom movement and misrepresenting its leaders. All too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent behind the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. This letter would later come to be known as the Letter from a Birmingham Jail and became one of America's greatest pieces of writing. It was published by the Atlantic Monthly and the Christian Century, though the New York Times refused to publish it. 4 days after the letter was published, Robert Kennedy once again intervened, this time as Attorney General. King was released, but he was told never to come back to Birmingham.